There we go. Now I won't have to talk so loud. I'll put it down here. But anyways, if you're in a position in your life today, or if it comes up on you, and you feel like this is the case in your life, I know sometimes we do face these things, and other times we go about our life, and our life seems to be going pretty well. But there is a psalm for that. There's a psalm for like so many things. I want to go through that for just probably in the next 2 to 3 lessons on Sunday night. Psalm 5, if you have ever read it, it's a beautiful psalm of prayer by David, and it expresses this heartfelt prayer to God. And David is seeking God's attention and guidance in his life. He reflects upon his daily troubles. He has these particular enemies that are after him, and they're surrounding him, and he's looking for God's protection and God's refuge from those who are after him. He reflects upon those daily troubles. He contrasts the righteousness of God with the wickedness of these evildoers, and he emphasizes that God does not delight in those who are wicked, those who are evil, those who are sinful people. And so he asks for divine protection and guidance, and as he faces his adversaries who are deceitful in righteousness. And so we look at the psalm, and it concludes with confidence. And David ends in that, and that God is a blessing. He's going to bless, and he's going to shield those who are of his, those who follow him, those who surround their life with God on their hearts. He's going to protect them like a shield. The psalm underscores trusting God's justice and faithfulness in the righteousness. So we think about that. There may not be anything in your life today. We may not be surrounded by enemies, but if you are, we got the election coming up, and if certain people don't like the one you're going to vote for, they can be combative. I've seen it. I know you've probably have seen it. Maybe it hasn't affected you. You're quiet about it. That's okay. But we have to always remember that the devil is after us. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8. He roams this earth like a roaring lion, seeking whomever he may devour. So we need to stand up, and the only way we're going to really do it is if we trust in God and we go to God in prayer every single day. Go to him. So how does David start this psalm? Well, let's look at that. First of all, David begins his morning with intimate prayer time with God. Look at verses 1 through 3. 1 through 3 says, "Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my groaning. Heed the sound of my cry for help, my King and my God. For to you I pray." See, he says, "For you too I pray." And he says, verse 3, "In the morning, O Lord, you will hear my voice. In the morning I will order my prayer to you and eagerly watch." So we see David here shows the depth of feeling and his earnest angst for God. And he does so in three synonymous appeals. Let's look at the first appeal. The first appeal, plea for perception. Look at verse 1. "Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my sighing," or my groaning. You imagine a child running to their parent, and they are urgently tugging on their shirt or their sleeve, and they want that attention. And the parent will lean down and listen and give their child their ear and attend to their needs. And that is what David here is really doing. He's seeking his Father. He's seeking God's focused attention. And so we think about, when we look at this and what it teaches us that we can be confident, can't we? We can be confident when we approach God in our raw emotions, when we go to him in our concerns, when we go to him that we need him, we're hurting, and we know that God is attentively listening to us. I hate when I do that. It is vital for our spiritual life to go to God. That He is going to be the one to help us conquer our problems. If we're not trusting in Him, then it's going to be a hard time. We're going to have a hard time. So we start day to day. As soon as you get up, day to day, we earnestly lay our thoughts and our worries before Him. Well, let's look at number 2 under this petition for presence, for His presence. Look at verse 2. Listen to my cry for help. And he says, my King and my God, for to you I pray. You picture a soldier in battle, and he's calling out to the commander, and his commander, and he's calling for his guidance. He needs his help. He needs reinforcement. Well, we look at David. David acknowledges God as both his king and his divine leader, underscoring his dependence on God's presence and his intervention in David's life. We must always approach God as both our King and as our Father. No matter who is our president come this Tuesday, no matter who it is may be someone you don't want to be our president, but still, Jesus is King. God is on the throne. That's what we have to think about. We may be disappointed come Tuesday, but it's our Master that we need to trust in. Because you think about it, spiritually speaking, He is our commander-in-chief, isn't He? We are basically the army of God. Ephesians chapter 6 uses that whole thing about being a soldier of Christ, putting on the full armor of God every day, and we know God is the one that we could trust in. Prayer isn't just a ritual, it's a declaration of dependence on God's rule and His active involvement in our lives. Well, let's look at number 3, preparation for the day. Verse 3, in the morning, O Lord, you hear my voice. In the morning, I lay my request before you and wait in expectation. So we go back to soldiers, and we see soldiers meticulously prepare for battle. They're going to go through the routines that they need to do. They're going to focus their mind on doing what they need to do in case they go into battle so they could gain the victory. Well, David begins his day by aligning his heart and his mind with God, doesn't he? Through prayer and through anticipation, he's petitioning God. Think about this. Prayer is not a backup plan. It's our battle plan. It really is. And whatever you're going through now, whatever we're going to go through coming up, we need to always focus on Him and always go to Him in that prayer that we know that God will be hearing, and He will listen to our prayers, and He will actually answer our prayers. This verse encourages us as believers to start our day. How do we start our day? We need to be intentional when we start our day. Do you get out of bed and just go about your day, go to work? Or do you get out of your bed and you go on bended knee? That's what we really need to do. Laying all of our requests and all our expectations before God. It reminds us to maintain an attitude of hopeful expectation and anticipation, trusting that God's going to act according to His will. How many of us start out our day on bended knee, going to God in prayer for your day? Whatever you have, work or whatever's ahead of you, you go to Him. You go to Him. Every single morning, the first thing I do is thank Him that I'm alive, that I have another day. And then I go through my family, thank you for my family, my church family, my friends, my very life. I go through and I just say, Lord, thank you. And I ask Him to guide me. And that I walk in to His will, not to my own will. Yeah, pray to God every single morning. That's got to be our first priority. You ever, you remember that Folgers commercial? I don't know if they still have it, but the best part of waking up. Folgers in my cup. Yeah, I would say Black Rifle or Blackout, but that's okay. But really, the best part of waking up is Jesus on our hearts and prayers going up. We have to think about that. Yeah, coffee's the bonus, isn't it? Have some coffee while you do that. Start out our morning to God. When I go fishing with Mark Rice, I got to do that really early because Mark comes and picks me up. If we're going to a lake far away, like Lake Collins, Mark's like, "I'll pick you up at 3." I go, 3? That's a little early. And if you're going to go with Mark, you're going to go early. And so I will get up then at about 2:30. Usually it's about 2 because you got to do a lot of things. But it doesn't matter what time we get up. If you get up at 9 o'clock, if you get up at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, doesn't matter. Get up and use your battle plan for the day. Go to God in prayer. Well, let's look at the second morning preparation, so to speak, that David talks about. Number 2 is an insightful perspective about God. When we look at that in verses 4 through 6 and also 9 and 10, looking closely, we can see God has a perfect standard of justice in both principle and practice. God takes no part in sin, does he? He is going to shun all workers of iniquity. Well, let's first look at God's pure nature in verses 4 and 5. It says, "For you are not a God who is pleased with wickedness. With you, evil people are not welcome." Think about that. Are evil people welcome in our life unless we're sitting down and studying with them? The arrogant cannot stand in your presence. Yeah, we look at God, God's holy nature, God, who he is. God cannot coexist with evil or with prideful people. He abhors sin. And also, those who live in darkness hate the light, don't they? John chapter 3 and verse 20 says the arrogant can't stand in your presence because they aren't walking in the light. They're walking in the darkness. You think about what David's telling us here. This point challenges us to look within, and assess our own hearts and our motives when we go to God and we approach him. And it reminds us that God values our sincerity and our love for him, our righteousness that we walk in. You think, as believers, we align our actions and our attitudes with his holiness. And then number 2, God's justice against evil. Kind of similar to what we just looked at. Punishment for perversity. Look at verses 9 and verses 6. You destroy those who speak falsehood. The Lord abhors the man of bloodshed and deceit. Verse 9 and 10. There is nothing reliable in what they say. Their inward part is destruction itself. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with their tongue. Hold them guilty, O God, by their own devices. Let them fall. In the multitude of their transgressions, thrust them out, for they are rebellious against you. And we think about that, serves as a sober reminder that deceit that we see all around, and the evil intentions of people, the maliciousness in people's lives and how they treat others, it's not going to be overlooked by God. You might hear somebody, why do they always get away with everything? Why do they, and we have that in the prophets, right? The prophets have said that, like, why do they continue to prosper when they do evil against your people? God's going to punish them. No one's going to get past God. As believers, we need to be vigilant in our pursuit of truth and integrity, knowing that God is going to be the one who upholds that justice. God is going to be the one to protect you and I from harm. You're walking in the Lord, no matter what happens to you, you're good, right? We have him. David then goes from asking God to punish the wicked. Now he's going to go into intensive praise to God in verse 7 and 8. David's approach here is like a child holding their parent's hand while navigating a challenging path. We think about the enemies. In contrast, they refuse help and they push forward arrogantly, only to falter. They're never going to succeed in their evilness, in their evil ways. First of all, look at number 1, a humble heart and a holy house. Look at verse 7. But I, by your great love, can come into your house in reverence. I bow toward your holy temple. Yeah, whenever we approach God, when we come together, we are in God's house. We are his household. 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 15. David acknowledges that he enters God's presence not through what he's done, not through his merit, not because he's some special guy, but by God's steadfast love and God's mercy that he has upon David, which he also has upon you and I. And we see the lesson that we can learn here is true worship is rooted in humility and reverence to God. When we approach him in prayer and we go to him, and as we do so, we praise him, it should come with our hearts acknowledging his grace, our hearts fully on him, rather than what we need, what we want. God's going to take care of us. And let's look at the guided path. Number 2, verse 8. It says, lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness because of my enemies. Make your way straight before me. You ever ask God that? How are we guided? Really, when we think about it, we look at the gospel today, and we are guided by the grace of God. So even if we face opposition and worldly pride, and we face this chaos, or people not treating us well, we're still going to continue to act like God. We're still going to continue to seek God, and we're going to have him as our commander-in-chief in our lives. So we're going to have to surrender our personal, our personal things that we really want to do. I mean, we could do things in this life that aren't sinful, but we cannot be about me, myself, and I. Let's look at that. Practicing humility in our approach to him. Having that genuine praise that comes from not entitlement, not a place of entitlement, but who we are, children of his. That God is the greatest thing that we could have in this life. And we need to continue to live and be dependent on him and his guidance. So David showed in these 2 verses that we just read, in praising God and having humility before him, it's going to lead to clarity and protection, while pride leads to peril. Lastly, the psalmist acknowledges in his prayer the incredible provisions we have from God in verse 11 and 12. We have a joyful shelter, so to speak. Look at verse 11. Verse 11 of our text says, but let all who take refuge in you be glad. Let them ever sing for joy. Spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may rejoice in you. When we read David's prayers, like when you pray, do we pray like David? We could say, no, there's no way I could pray like David. Never say that. You could give all your heart, pour everything out to him when you go to him in prayer. Think about how great God is and his great provision that comes upon us and how powerful it is. You know, I think of the poor people who are caught in the storms, but there's so many back south, back, Midwest, or especially back in the East Coast right now. And there's many people who were protected in their homes. Of course, there's so many who were not. And then we think about God. God is so much more powerful than any house you could be, any basement, any storm shelter that we could be in. and God provides for his children. And it's such a beautiful thing when we read this prayer of David and take refuge in him. He is our shelter. Find that joy and that security in God's presence every single day. Even when you're surrounded by problems and trouble. That's life. We all do. But we can still rejoice because God is our refuge and he loves us. And then number 2, favor-filled fortress. Look at verse 12 of our text, the last verse of Psalm chapter 5. It says, "Surely, Lord, you bless the righteous. You surround them with your favor as with a shield." God surrounds us. God protects us. What a blessing we have in God and his provisions. And so we see when David here, this psalm and this last verse also, and we see this beautiful, vivid picture of who God is and what he does for us, the refuge that he provides for us, the shield that he gives us to protect us, his favor as that shield. God's provision includes both tangible and spiritual blessings. So while others may trust in their own strength, while others may trust in their own resources, as believers of God, as followers of God, we give all our trust in him. We know who he is in our lives. We know he gives us shelter. He is the great provider. He is, I mean, we could sit here and say so many things that God is in our lives that's good. So as we leave, it's just, we just need to all reflect on Psalm chapter 5 and start your day by what David states here in Psalm chapter 5. You can't go wrong by doing so. Not saying your day is going to then be perfect. We'll probably have troubles, but we start it this way, praying to God every day and knowing that we could go to him as our refuge. It's going to be so much easier when we face the problems of life, that we're going to be joyful people. Find that refuge in God. Pray to him daily, especially in the morning if you can. And the lesson is yours today. How are you approaching God? Are you approaching him later on in your day, after everything? Maybe when you face something serious and then you go to him in prayer. That's good too. We need to do that. Are you going to him early in the morning and say, God, help me, guide me in this life ahead, or whatever problems you may have? You could go to him. Isn't that beautiful what we have with him? So very awesome. Let's stand as we sing